Hello, fellow teachers, and welcome to the Supplemental Teaching Activities video for Joseph Smith History 1, verses 1 through 26. And remember that the purpose of this video is not to delve into scriptural commentary or insights. That's the focus of the other video that I've uploaded this week, which is going to walk you through the scriptures and highlight some of the things that I would teach and say. And I highly recommend that you watch that video first, as this one is going to build on and refer to many of the ideas and activities explained there. Without that context, some of the suggestions here may not make as much sense. This video focuses more on the hows of teaching and gives you a number of activities and questions that you can use in your lessons. The ideas here aren't intended to all be used in a lesson. So select the activities and questions that best fit your students' needs and your available time. And then feel free to adapt or modify them as you need. But before we jump into this week's activities, I do have an important announcement to make for anybody who is currently signed up for the Book of Mormon bundle subscription from last year's study, and you're planning to sign up for this year's Doctrine and Covenants bundle subscription. I don't want anybody to end up getting a Dropbox full message this year and have Dropbox telling you that you need to pay for some premium service because you've run out of space. Because unless you're storing other documents or photos or things in there, you shouldn't have to ever pay some additional fee to use Dropbox. The free account should be plenty to store the lesson materials that I'll be uploading throughout the year. But it may not have enough space to hold 2 full years of content. So here's what I want you to do. Make sure that you've downloaded all of the files from the Book of Mormon Dropbox folder to your personal computer or to an external storage device, so that you'll always have those materials available in the future if you need them. And that's really easy to do. You just go to the folder and hit the 3 little dots to the right and select download. Then you'll have those files forever. So I encourage you to do that as soon as you can, because what I'm going to do on February 1st is I'm going to remove everyone's access to the Book of Mormon folder. Because once the year's complete, that system is really unnecessary. The file set is done, and there won't be any more future uploads added to that folder in the future. And then that's going to free up all the space that you're going to need for a full year of the Doctrine and Covenants subscription materials, if you choose to get one. Now, don't worry if at some future date you realize that you need those files again and you can't find your downloaded ones. Or if there's somebody out there who misses this message and they go back to grab a file and they find they don't have access anymore. All you need to do is contact me at teachingwithpower@gmail.com and you can request renewed access. And I've got a record of everybody who subscribed, so I can get you those files without any additional purchase or hassle. But I'm hoping that that's going to clear up any confusion or frustration during this next year with getting a Dropbox full message. And if this is confusing anybody, or you can see any potential problem with this for you, please feel free to reach out to me. But that out of the way, let's get into this week's lessons. And lesson number 1 is what I would entitle Inquirers After Truth. The truth here, as we seek for truth in a truly confusing world, we can realize that truth needs no manipulation or embellishment, but only to be presented with sincerity and humility. The fire in the bones for this activity stems from the fact that we, like Joseph, live in a very confusing world with many, many competing voices that are vying for our attention, telling us what we should think. And whether that's political voices, theological voices, media voices, anti-faith voices, we're surrounded by them. And this lesson can help give your students some help in recognizing truth amidst all of that noise. There's a difference between the tactics that the adversary uses to influence and control and the methods that the Lord uses to reveal truth to us. The fire in the bones, then, comes from the fact that you're going to give your students some very relevant advice for distinguishing between the two. You're going to give them tools for recognizing which voices are legitimate and those that are merely manipulative. The object for this lesson would be signs. And what you can do is post around your classroom a number of different signs with competing and conflicting messages. And these signs are going to be available for you to print out in this week's downloads. And the messages that I have displayed on those signs say, this is the only way, follow us for real truth, the answers you seek are here, guaranteed truth inside, and a number of other messages. But that's the spirit of them. For an icebreaker then, and a handout, you could do the word search activity that I suggested in the Insight video. The activity that invites your students to look for the word truth in the word search. And the word search is full of the word opinions. It's really easy to find that word. And I found that this works really well and is a fun way to begin this lesson. And then the bulk of your lesson is going to revolve around the 3 following search activities from Joseph Smith history. And I might do this in just a little bit of a different order than I presented in my Insight video. The first search activity would be to have your students find the description of Joseph Smith's world, his environment, which is going to transition nicely from the icebreaker activity and match the message of the signs that you've got posted all around the room. Just goes to show how Joseph's world and situation is very much like our own. So the search question would be this. In Joseph Smith history, verses 5 through 12, find and highlight as many descriptions as you can of the world or circumstances that Joseph Smith was experiencing as a young boy. And once they've found them and you've discussed them, I would ask this discussion question. Can you relate to Joseph's world? If so, where have you seen similar circumstances? Second search activity revolves around the idea of Joseph's audience. Who is this history that he's writing here for? And the entire Doctrine and Covenants and the entire Restoration for that matter. The activity would be to invite them to fill in the provided blanks. And this could be done rather quickly, but I'd also invite them to mark these phrases in a unique color. And finally, our third search activity would be to invite them to find the 3 P's of persuasion, the 3 different ways that people may use to persuade us that they're speaking the truth. And here you just give them the verses and invite them to shout them out once they find them. Then a discussion question you could ask following this activity would be, when have you seen examples of promoting, proving, or presenting in your experience? Now, I suggest that you not have your students do all 3 of these search activities unless you feel you have time for that. But I'd just select 2 of them, and then you could present the other one as the teacher. Not everything has to be a search activity. Sometimes, for time's sake, you just share. A video suggestion that could complement this lesson is entitled Discovering the Truth. And it comes from a general conference talk given by Elder Uchtdorf, where he related this brilliant little poem called The 6 Men of Indostan, and talks about how difficult it can be to find truth in a confusing world. And then he concludes with a hopeful message that it's possible for us to find truth even in these difficult circumstances. The quote then that I would use would be that wonderful reflection given by Professor Arthur Henry King regarding Joseph's account of the first vision as a prime example of presenting the truth rather than promoting or proving. Take it to heart question. Have you ever felt overwhelmed by the conflicting opinions and voices in the world? If so, what strategies have you tried to separate truth from opinion? For and I will go and do. When you hear conflicting opinions, what questions could you ask yourself to discern whether they are based on truth or just opinions? And I've got some suggested questions I put there. Is it presented factually and without manipulation? Does the person sharing the information present it straightforwardly without trying to provoke intense emotions or overwhelm with excessive arguments? Does it align with both my mind and heart? And is the person trying to prove a point, sway opinion for personal gain, or manipulate emotions rather than simply presenting the truth? Takeaway slide would look like this then. The memorable message being, to inquirers after truth, truth need not be promoted or proven, only presented. Now that first lesson acts as a good introduction to Joseph Smith's situation and hopefully invites your students to reflect on similarities between their situation and Joseph's. But this next lesson is where the rubber really hits the road. It's focused on what Joseph did in these circumstances and the results of his actions. As a teacher, if I could only choose one of these two lessons to teach, I might briefly summarize the main idea of lesson number 1 and really focus my attention here on lesson number 2. Lesson number 2 is, I have learned for myself. Truth. By following Joseph Smith's example, we can find answers to our questions, receive personal revelation, and come to know truth for ourselves. And I don't think there's much I need to say here about the fire in the bones for this lesson. This has got to be one of the greatest, most relevant, powerful sections of Scripture for members of the church anywhere. No wonder it's one of the very first things missionaries share in the mission field. Not only is it important in terms of our beliefs in the restoration, living prophets, the nature of the Godhead, other key doctrines, but it's also key in what Joseph teaches us by example. Your job as a teacher is to not only help them understand what happened to Joseph, but how it relates to them, how it can help them to learn for themselves what's true, how to gain a testimony or knowledge from God. And it's so good. I hope you feel its power before you start teaching it. My suggested object for this lesson would be to just find a really nice framed picture of the first vision, if possible. If you can't find one framed, then a poster of one from the church library might suffice. Or you could take one of those posters and place it in a frame that you already have just for this lesson. But that would serve as a nice visual backdrop, because I didn't want to choose an object that would in any way distract from the story. For an icebreaker, and to keep with that more solemn and sacred feeling that should accompany this lesson, I would do this favorites activity. And what you do is you display the following slide and invite your students to pick which of these 5 famous phrases from Joseph's account of the first vision is their favorite, and to be prepared to give a reason why. And then you can either invite them to share their answer with a partner, with a group, or with the class as a whole. Those phrases are, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God. I saw a pillar of light exactly over my head, above the brightness of the sun. I saw 2 personages whose brightness and glory defy all description. This is my beloved Son. Hear him. And I have learned for myself. Those are the phrases that I would display. And I think that I would ask these taking it to heart questions earlier in the lesson, before you really get into the text of the Scriptures. What is a question that you're currently seeking answers to? Something you're trying to gain greater light and understanding about? Do you lack wisdom in any specific area of your faith? And with that personal question in mind, I feel that the search activity that you do next will be much more meaningful for your class. The search activity is to challenge your students to go into Joseph Smith history, verses 7 through 20, and identify and mark the phrases that show what Joseph did to discover the truth. And that activity should cover the bulk of your time in teaching this lesson, as they pull out those actions. And for each one, after they've done it, you can talk about why that step would be important for anybody to take that was seeking for answers from God, in the way that I did it in the Insight video. And with each point, you can add a personal inquiring quiz question, which is meant to personalize each action that Joseph took and apply it to our own searches or inquiries after truth. And as I suggested in that video, if you feel that that represents too big of a chunk for your students to tackle at once, you could assign half of the class to cover verses 7 through 13 and the other half to do verses 14 through 20. And then a second search activity would be to send your students into verses 19 through 20 to look for phrases that represent the results of Joseph's sincere search for truth. And at the conclusion of those search activities and class discussion, I would also be sure to briefly recap that overall message with this summarizing slide. If you were to show a video, the one that makes the most sense here would be to show one of the church's videos of the first vision. There's a number of options to choose from, but the one that I recommend is the following video, which was produced for a display at the Church History Museum in Salt Lake. I like its simplicity and its focus on Joseph Smith's own words rather than any dramatization of events. And I believe it can help your students to visualize what happened to Joseph Smith on that early spring morning. There are other options though, and if you prefer something different, this video would be my second choice. And I'll provide a link to both of these in the video description. For a quote, I like the statement made by Elder Bednar in 2019, which reiterates the fact that one of the reasons the story of the first vision is so powerful is because it shows us how we too can learn for ourselves. He said, as young Joseph returned to his home from the sacred grove, immediately after the appearance of the Father and the Son, he spoke first with his mother. As he leaned up to the fireplace, his mother inquired what the matter was. Joseph replied, never mind, all is well. I am well enough off. He then said to his mother, I have learned for myself. Joseph's experience provides a powerful pattern of learning that each of us should emulate. We too need to learn for ourselves. One of my favorite discussion questions to ask during this lesson is this one. Why do you think God allowed the adversary to attack Joseph with darkness as he prayed? And I shared my thoughts on that in the Insight video, but I found this to be a very thought-provoking question. And for an I will go and do, what actions could you take to actively search for truth in your own life? And then there's some suggestions. Reflect deeply on a personal question or concern. Pray sincerely and consistently for guidance. Study the scriptures with a specific question in mind. Create a quiet, private space for prayer. Attend church meetings or participate in discussions to gain insight. Be patient and persistent in your search for truth, trusting answers will come in God's time. And for the handout, I'd provide my students with the inquiring quiz questions from the Insight video. And you can encourage them to keep it in their scriptures or take it home as a tool for personal reflection. Because I believe that these questions can really guide somebody as they seek for spiritual knowledge for themselves. Our takeaway slide here serves as a reminder then that your students can indeed learn for themselves in their own personal sacred groves, wherever those happen to be for them. Finally, lesson number 3, a disturber and an annoyer. Truth, like Joseph Smith, we too can stand firm in our faith despite challenges by acting, affirming, and asserting. The fire in the bones here is kindled by inviting your students to ponder how their faith has been challenged, which I believe is a situation that most believers are going to experience or have experienced. What opposition have they faced from the outside world to their beliefs? And what we're going to find here in these verses is a shining example of somebody who, despite the most bitter of persecution, persevered in their testimony. Our job as teachers is to help our students connect with Joseph and find strength in his resolve and steadfastness. For an object to this lesson, I suggest you find a big rock, as big as you can handle carrying, and on it, write one of my favorite statements ever made by Joseph Smith that's found in these verses. And I suggest that you write it in chalk so that you can easily wash it off and replace the rock where you found it. But the phrase, for I had seen a vision. I knew it, and I knew that God knew it, and I could not deny it. Then when you come to the part of the lesson where that phrase is discussed, you could point to the rock and invite your students to ponder the strength and firmness of Joseph's testimony. He had a rock-solid faith. And you could invite them to think about their testimony, and maybe even give each of them a smaller rock of their own that they could take home with the words, my faith, written on them. And that can hopefully serve as a reminder for them to seek to make their own faith rock solid like Joseph's. For an icebreaker, I really like the activity that I suggested in the insight video where you just ask if anybody's ever been accused of disturbing or annoying somebody. Perhaps as a teacher, you could share a funny story of a time when you were told that you were being annoying. If you had siblings growing up, then you probably have some of those experiences. Then, to get your students into the scriptures, invite them to look for who else was described as being a disturber and an annoyer. That person was, of course, Joseph Smith, the great disturber and annoyer of Satan's kingdom. Now, last week I promised that I would give you one game idea each week that you could choose from if you believe that that's the kind of activity your class needs. But I'd caution you to make sure that if you're teaching a lesson on the first vision, that there's plenty of time for reverent reflection. I wouldn't make the entire lesson a game. But you could introduce this lesson with this short little game that I call the most annoying sounds in the world. What I've done here is I've embedded these sounds into the PowerPoint slides for this week. And all you do is click on the little speaker icons and it will play the sounds. And they have to guess what the sound is. And I'm not going to play those sounds here, but the ones that I've included are dripping water, a mosquito buzzing, a high-pitched microphone feedback, an alarm clock going off, loud chewing, a car alarm, nails on a chalkboard, and then probably the one that I think is the most annoying is a fork scraping on a plate. And to actually play the game, I'd invite two students up to the front to face off against each other. And whichever person shouts out the name of the sound first wins. Maybe you give them a little treat for winning. But then you can tie that activity into the scriptures by saying that there's a sound that really, really annoys the devil. You can even ask them to think about what they think that might be. Later in the lesson, you can make the point that it is the sound of testimony, the sound of affirming and asserting our faith that most disturbs and annoys Satan. That's his most annoying sound. And you can encourage them to make that sound as often as they please, to bug Satan. That's their job. And the search activity and handout, for that matter, would be to give them time to fill out the study guide that I described in the Insight video. The handout does a good job of providing discussion questions and taking it to heart questions. As a class, you just go through and discuss their answers. You can watch the Insight video for some of my thoughts for each of those questions. If you wish to show a video, it might be nice to give your students a chance to ponder their testimony of the first vision while they watch a special musical number. There's a number of different versions of the hymn Joseph Smith's First Prayer that you could choose from. But I like this particular version that I found on YouTube. It's a beautiful rendition of the hymn, and scenes from one of the church's first vision movies accompanies it. It could be a nice way to bring the power of that moment into the hearts of your students. Quote, Joseph F. Smith. Now we are thankful to the Lord that we are counted worthy to be taken notice of by the devil. I would fear very much for our safety if we had fallen into a condition where the devil ceased to be concerned about us. So long as the Spirit of the Lord is enjoyed by you, so long as you are living your religion and keeping the commandments of the Lord, walking uprightly before Him, I assure you that the adversary of souls will not rest easy. He will be discontented with you, will find fault with you, and he will arraign you before his bar. But that will not hurt you very much if you will just keep on doing right. See how that goes along with annoying Satan. For and I will go and do, what's something you could do this week to disturb and annoy Satan's kingdom? And as usual, I've listed some suggestions. Our takeaway slide here then reminds your students to be disturbers and annoyers of Satan and his kingdom. Encourage them to take that moniker on boldly and without shame. And that will conclude this supplemental teaching activities video. I pray that it helps you to teach with a fire in the bones. Thank you for watching. Get out there and teach with power.